Welcome to the interview here on France 24. I'm Philip Crowther in Washington. We're on Capitol Hill today to go right to the heart of the debate that's happening right now here in the United States on Syria and on whether yes or no the United States should intervene militarily. This is a debate that's been raging here in Congress over the last week, and indeed is a debate that's being had in public as well, with public support currently for military strikes by the United States plummeting. Our guest on the France 24 interview today is Senator John McCain of Arizona, and also former Republican presidential candidate in 2008. Senator John McCain, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, you've been advocating for a strong US military intervention in Syria for quite a while now. But what we're seeing right now is we've moved on to the diplomatic push between the United States and Russia. Is that something that you welcome, and indeed is that something that you think will have a success in the short or the long term?
Could I mention that if we had acted a couple of years ago when the momentum was on the side of the Free Syrian Army, we would not be faced with this problem now. Of course, all of us seek a peaceful, non-violent resolution to this conflict. But I must say that I'm extremely skeptical that anything really good will come out of this, because I think Bashar Assad has the upper hand as far as momentum on the battlefield. And also, the United States seems to be more involved in simply the narrow issue of removal of chemical weapons than the overall issue that I think we should be addressing, and that is the departure, the negotiated departure of Bashar Assad. That can only happen if he believes he's losing on the ground.
You say a negotiated departure. What about a forced departure?
Only with a shift in momentum, only with the assistance of the United States and other countries that are already assisting, such as the Saudis, to provide them with the weapons that they need so they can be on a shift the momentum on their side. For a long time, actually up until about a year ago, there was the momentum on their side. Then you saw 5,000 Hezbollah, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, increased supplies of arms from both Russia and Iran, and that tilted the battlefield equation significantly in favor of Bashar Assad. I think he thinks he can win.
Does it mean it's too late now, first of all, for this diplomatic push and this potential military intervention by the United States? Is it simply too late, in your opinion?
No. The majority of those fighting are moderates. The Syrian people, as is well known, are moderates. The highest literacy rate in the Arab world is in Syria, and they're not going to stand for al-Nusra or some foreign jihadist governing them. Now look, in the post-Assad world, we are going to have to help the moderate Syrian, the Free Syrian Army, overcome these radical elements that have flooded in. But to have Bashar Assad remain in power, all kinds of messages are sent, not to mention the suffering of the Syrian people. What lesson do the Iranians draw? What lessons do the Israelis draw? What lessons do the North Koreans draw? There's a whole lot at stake here. And the conflict has now become regional. We've seen Iraq dissolving, Jordan in a
But still, you'd advocate for heavier weaponry to be provided by the United States?
Absolutely.
What's the risk involved here? It's a big risk after all, isn't it?
I don't think it's a risk at all as far as anti-armor is concerned. There's so many misconceptions out there. One of them is we can't get the weapons to the right people. Well, the Saudis have been getting the weapons to the right people. Second of all, that somehow this is overtaken by Islamic jihadist extremists. It is not. There is a significant number there, about 20 to 30%.
That is a very high number.
It's a very high number, and it gets higher every day. And 2 years ago, there were none of them. But we could still assist them upon the departure of Bashar Assad to reject these people, and the Syrian people would reject them as well.
There seems to be a lot of opposition in the United States after all.
Yes.
The polls are getting worse and worse from your point of view in the sense that there is less and less support for a military intervention as the days go by. Does that make you reluctant to vote for a military intervention if and when that vote does come along?
What makes me reluctant is that the president has, although he gave a good speech and was very compassionate about the children who have been massacred, but the president has not articulated a strategy or a plan that the American people could see would bring this to a beneficial end. And when the Secretary of State says that any strike would be unbelievably small, then my constituents say, what are we trying to do here? If you're having an unbelievably small strike, what's the point? So a lot of the things that have been said have, one, Americans are weary because of Iraq, but they don't have confidence in that this president has a strategy that overall would prevent us from ever putting American boots on the ground.
But you as a senator, for example, you're one of those who might still vote for a military intervention, and you're hearing this opposition back home in Arizona. At what point does that opposition become too much for you to maybe switch that vote after all?
I think that, one, the key is, do we have a strategy and a plan? Two, keeping in mind that if the Congress of the United States overruled the President of the United States after the President of the United States had said that he's going to strike. Now, if the President said, I'm going to strike with the consent of Congress, that's one scenario. The President says, I'm going to strike, and then says, but I've got to get the support of Congress. A down vote, a negative vote, would be catastrophic as far as the credibility of this president is concerned, at least for the next 3 years.
Well, a colleague of yours, Senator Bob Corker, said that President Barack Obama was an uncomfortable commander-in-chief. Is that something you'd agree with?
I think to a degree, because I think the president, for example, in his speech, made an argument for two courses of action. One, the strike, and two, because of recent events, which were largely accidental, for a pause.
Do you really believe those were accidental?
Oh, of course I do. When the Secretary of State says, well, the best thing they can do is get rid of their chemical weapons, but they won't do it, and his spokesperson derides that as a way out. And again, what we're seeing here in Geneva, or what we've seen in Geneva, is kind of a rope-a-dope. Now Bashar Assad is demanding that they stop aiding the rebels. The Russians are saying you've got to renounce force. And of course, then there was that wonderful piece in the New York Times by Vladimir Putin, which
I'm sure you liked it.
Offended every American.
Let's have a look at the diplomacy that is going on right now. They are strange bedfellows after all. The United States and Russia clearly opposed in terms of how the situation should be sorted out. And you even think that these are two completely incompatible positions after all, because one side says that one side used chemical weapons, as in the Assad regime, that being the United States. Russia still says it was the opposition that used chemical weapons. How is it possible to reconcile those two positions? Doesn't that give us the impression that this diplomacy might just fail?
I think it's impossible to reconcile those two positions, and I have the faint hope that those positions can be reconciled.
Do you think that is a concrete possibility, that if the United States does intervene militarily, if that does happen on the basis of the use of chemical weapons, that then it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, that the United States no longer needs to intervene? The red line has been crossed, there's been a reaction, and that's it.
I fear that that may be the case, and I would remind you again that the President of the United States said we were going to strike. He didn't say with the agreement of Congress.
Would you have preferred that? Even as a senator?
Listen, we woke up one morning and Ronald Reagan had invaded a small country called Grenada.
That would have been okay with you?
Absolutely, because I think our War Powers Act says that the President can act, but he has to come back within 60 days and get endorsement from Congress. I mean, he has the constitutional right to do that.
Well, let's finally look into the crystal ball a little bit here. Where do you think the situation in Syria, and indeed the United States stance, will stand, say in a month's time from now? Will this end at the United Nations? Will it end in Congress, possibly with that vote? Or will it just continue on the battlefield with no intervention?
I can think, unfortunately, I can think of three scenarios. One is we have successful negotiations that Bashar al-Assad abandons the chemical weapons and we go to another Geneva conference and he agrees to leave power and we see a peaceful resolution. The second is that that it really does come to nothing and the United States of America does not act and therefore lose all credibility throughout the world. And the third scenario is that we do strike, we do give if they fail, we do give the Free Syrian Army the assistance they need, and over time they succeed and Bashar al-Assad then negotiates and departs. Right now, I'm afraid that the most likely scenario, by far the most likely scenario, is that we just flounder around, there's talks, they're inconclusive, various demands are made, and meanwhile, Bashar al-Assad intensifies his attacks on the Free Syrian Army. I'm afraid that's the scenario. And could I just say a word? I appreciate Mr. Hollande's support. I appreciate the fact that...
One of very few, after all.
Yes, one of the very few. But I appreciate his support. But I also think that it may have put him in a kind of unfair political position after he's come out strongly in support. And then there is this backtracking, because I'm afraid that still this issue is going to be decided, in the words of Mr. Bismarck, by blood and steel.
I think we'll leave it there, and I'd be happy to check in with you again and see where we stand in a few months' time.
Anytime.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Senator John McCain of Arizona, our guest on the France 24 interview today. Thank you very much for watching, and please do stay tuned to France 24.